It's Joseph here on the John the Hut Dweller YouTube channel. I'd like to discuss the shrinking world of L Ron Hubbard and some quotes from there, and just to tell you what they mean. Because Scientology, they say one thing and they mean another. And just to go through what L Ron Hubbard said, and I actually wrote it down. The question was, he asked him, what does Scientology mean? He says, well, it's the study of knowingness. And the reporter was very good from the BBC, said, keep in mind this is from the 60s, so this is really good. Said, but what does that mean? What does it mean to the layperson? He says, this is his quote. He says, if a man were totally aware of what was going on around him, he would find it relatively simple to handle any outnesses in that. Now, I know you probably think I read it wrong. If a man were totally aware of what was going on around him, he would find it relatively simple to handle any outnesses in that. All right. And it goes on. This is more about science, pictures of it, interviews an ex-Scientologist, and they asked him about an authoritarian state, and they said, and he says, he goes through that, and they said, tries to ignore it, and he says, well, what about you? The interviewer says, what about your treatment of SPs? They said, you don't allow criticism. He said, oh no, an SP, suppressive person. I got the lingo down, sorry. Oh no, a suppressive person, he says, a suppressive person isn't critical. A suppressive person is one who denies the rights of others. But surely, you do that, same thing to them. He says, oh, perhaps, but if someone is going to kill a baby, I'd think you deny him the right. It's very vital that you understand that he's talking about in his own organization. He sees suppressed people everywhere. This is when he's getting very paranoid, and he's living on this boat, moored off the North African coast. See, he doesn't call them critics because they're not thinking critically. They're not part of my thinking. They're SPs. And he goes on. The only reason any discipline had to enter the scene, and the government should be very glad that the discipline is there, is to keep the lunatic fringe and from other people of exploiting the subject and victimizing people with it. Again, you can see he's talking about his own people. When they talk about the authoritarian state, they mean throwing people overboard, bound, locking children in closets for days without letting them go to the bathroom with nothing to eat. He thinks all these people are evil, wicked people, like these little Hitlers that have got in his organization because they're not doing everything he asks, And they asked him. This is actually kind of strange, and actually funny. L Ron Hubbard was married 3 times, and because he says, oh, they say we're breaking up marriages. That's a lie. I have a book right here that I just wrote, and it's 50 some odd marriages it's saved. What? So they asked him, okay, marriage, you brought up. How many times have you been married? He says, I've been married twice. My first wife is dead. He said, what about your second wife? I never had a second wife. Okay, if you only had 2 wives, or if you only think you had 2 wives, why wouldn't you say, well, my second wife is my current wife and she has my kids? And no, I never had a second wife. You see that? He cleared it from his mind, so he never had her. She did exist, but it's just cleared. Go on to the next one. Next bit of craziness. It says, they asked him about Swiss bank accounts. He says, I don't have Swiss bank accounts. I have a bank in Switzerland, but I don't know how much it's in there. He has a bank account in Switzerland, but he doesn't have Swiss banks. Okay. I'll let you guys laugh at that one. Okay, and he said, well, they think, you're a great guy on this ship. They asked him, why don't you go out and talk to me? He's like, no, perfectly happy to associate with anybody. And he says, and they don't think I'm fantastic. The truth is, they don't think I'm fantastic. If you were to see how many times they don't follow my orders. Now, what does that mean? They interviewed a guy who was on the ship, who had recently left the ship, and he says, well, they aren't following his orders because they're incompetent, they're not able, and there's many times accidents. See, if you make a mistake in Scientology, you're disobeying Scientology. It's strange, I know. I mean, that even if somebody trips, they blame it on that person. Well, maybe it was either that person or it's somebody around them. They have a thing called PTS. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder. PTS is somebody who's chronically ill. You can't be around somebody who's chronically ill. They're a potential trouble source because they have bad deeds, bad crimes on them. So when you see all those people who have cancer, dying of AIDS, dying of malaria in other countries, babies that have died, it's their fault. It's their crimes coming back on them. They asked, this is the greatest thing. He says Scientology is a science. I said, well, it's they list off all these things. Well, it's a faith, and he does not say it's a faith. He keeps saying it's a science. Well, it's funny that they protest and say, oh, we're a religion, and they fought to get tax exemption in America, even though L Ron Hubbard, when he was on a ship, was trying to deny the fact that it was a religion. And he says, nobody finds faults with me. My kids are all cheerful. My son committed suicide. Is that cheerful? His other son, after he pumped him full of speed and got all the OT levels from him, left, deserted him, changed his name to Ron DeWolf, and went out and actively talked against his father. He didn't hear from his father for such a long time. He thought he was dead, and he started fighting Scientology in courts to get his inheritance from him. And Scientology finally came with a document with L Ron Hubbard's thumbprint on it and some signature or whatever to prove that he was alive. I mean, he was so secluded. It was kind of like a Howard Hughes type thing. Long beard, nails, everything. L Ron Hubbard. This is a great documentary. I think it's the only one with L Ron Hubbard in it that he didn't make himself. The Shrinking World of L Ron Hubbard. I think that's, I'm going to put it as the title too, is the name of the documentary. So you have to just type it in. Type in L Ron Hubbard documentary. I think it's about the first one that pops up, or even type his last name, Hubbard. But it kind of doesn't make sense until you actually start learning about Scientology and realizing that things like they disobey my orders, or this means if you're not able to do something, or if you screw up at it, or let's say on the way to do it you trip, fall, and break your arm, he sees that as an attack on him. Personal attack. That's why all these SPs, these suppressive persons, these are all people from within Scientology that he was locking up and doing all this type of stuff. He says, well, the government should be grateful. These people are criminals. Yeah. It's only criminals L Ron Hubbard. Not anybody who follows what he does.